Now that we have our first two triggers under our belts, let's put them next to each other side by side and compare the similarities and differences between the two. On the left, we have our first trigger, Hello World. And on the right, we have our second, Apple Watch. Note that I've added some extra spacing to each trigger to make the comparison a little easier on the eyes. Remember, spacing has no effect on how Salesforce interprets your code. A high-level look at our triggers shows that they have a lot in common. First, they both each start with the general trigger definition. They both have a trigger loop. And finally, they both have lines of business logic inside the trigger loop that sets field values. Now let's take a look at where they differ. First, they each have a unique trigger name. No surprises here. Next, they each run on different objects. Also, no surprises here. Hello World runs whenever its object records are updated, and Apple Watch runs whenever its object records are inserted. But one interesting thing here is that Hello World runs before the event happens, while Apple Watch runs after the event happens. This is a very important distinction for you to recognize and understand, but hold this thought for a moment while we cover the rest of the differences. Next, we have the trigger loop. Both trigger loops start off by creating variables for their respective objects. But even though both trigger loops run on different objects, they each use the same special trigger.new keyword because that represents the list of records entering each trigger. Moving on, you see that the Apple Watch trigger creates a new record, while the Hello World trigger doesn't. In the following lines, both triggers do roughly the same thing as they each update fields on records. Finally, Apple Watch specifically saves its work, while Hello World doesn't need to. At this point, a few question marks should be blinking in your head. Why did we not need to save our work in the Hello World trigger? Could this be related to the fact that it's a before trigger, not an after trigger? Time to put on your detective hats. Let's get to the bottom of this mystery.